The meeting room on Nexus Prime Station felt different today. Jake Morrison noticed it the moment he walked through the doors with his team. The usual friendly nods from other species were missing. Instead, he saw nervous glances and whispered conversations that stopped when humans came near. Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 3 years now. He knew how these monthly meetings worked. Usually they talked about trade deals, settled small disputes between worlds, and shared information about new discoveries. Today felt like something bigger was coming. Dr. Lisa Grant walked beside him, carrying her datapad and looking around the room with curious eyes. She was the smartest person Jake knew when it came to understanding alien species. If something was wrong, she would figure it out first. Behind them, Commander Ryan Bell kept his military bearing, but Jake could see his eyes scanning the room for threats, old habits from his days as a fleet officer. 47 species here today, Lisa whispered to Jake as they took their seats at the human table. That's everyone. Even the small colony sent representatives. Something big is definitely happening. Jake nodded and settled into his chair. The human section was in the middle of the great circular chamber, with Earth's blue and green flag hanging above their table. Around them, beings from across the galaxy took their places. The tall gray Zephyrians with their large eyes and thin limbs. The furry Altarians who looked almost like Earth's bears but stood upright and wore fancy robes. The scaled Centaurians with their proud military bearing and bright-colored crests. Prime Speaker Vexton stood at the center podium. He was the leader of the Zephyrian delegation and had been running these meetings for over 20 years. His voice carried easily through the chamber's sound system as he called the session to order. Fellow beings of the Galactic Council, Vexton began. His words translated into dozens of languages through the communication devices everyone wore. Today we face a matter of great importance to the future of our alliance. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. Ryan shifted in his seat, his soldier instincts picking up on the formal tone. This was not going to be a normal meeting. In the 5 years since humanity joined our council, Vexton continued, we have witnessed unprecedented changes in the balance of galactic civilization. These changes require our careful consideration and action. The Zephyrian leader touched a control on his podium, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber. It showed star maps, trade routes, and fleet positions across known space. Jake recognized many of the human settlements and shipping lanes marked in blue. When Earth first petitioned for membership, Vexton said, they controlled 12 star systems and had a fleet of 200 vessels. Today, they control 37 systems and operate over 800 ships. Their expansion rate exceeds that of any species in recorded council history. Murmurs spread around the chamber. Jake kept his face neutral, but inside he felt a growing unease. The numbers were correct, but the way Vexton presented them made human growth sound threatening rather than successful. Furthermore, the Prime Speaker continued, human technological advancement has disrupted established research partnerships and trade agreements. Their military expansion has altered the balance of power in 3 major sectors. Their diplomatic success has shifted traditional alliance structures. Now Jake understood what was happening. This was not just a report. This was an accusation. The other species were afraid of how fast humanity was growing and changing the galaxy. Lisa leaned over and whispered in his ear, look at the Centaurian delegation. They're nodding along with everything he says. The Altarians too. This was planned. Jake glanced around the chamber and saw what Lisa meant. Many of the species' representatives had expressions of concern or agreement. They had been talking about this before the meeting. They had made decisions about humanity without any human input. Vexton gestured to the holographic display again. The Galactic Council has always maintained peace through careful balance between member species. No single civilization has been allowed to dominate others through rapid expansion or technological superiority. This principle has served us well. For over 3 centuries. Commander Bell leaned forward in his chair. Jake could see the anger building in his old friend's eyes. Ryan had fought in the border wars before humanity joined the Council. He had lost friends protecting human colonies from raiders and hostile aliens. To hear human success described as a threat was deeply insulting to him. Therefore, Vex then announced, the senior species of this council proposed the implementation of a developmental restriction protocol specifically concerning human activities. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the translation devices. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized what was coming next. A new holographic document appeared. In the air above them, Jake could see the formal language and official seals that made it a real proposal for council vote. Dr. Grant was already reading through it on her datapad, her face growing paler with each line. The protocol includes the following measures. Vex then read aloud. First, human territorial expansion will be limited to currently held systems until further review. Second, human fleet size will be capped at present numbers, with any new construction requiring council approval. Third, all major human research projects must receive council oversight to ensure they do not destabilize existing technological agreements. Jake heard Ryan take a sharp breath behind him. Lisa had stopped reading and was staring at the holographic document with shocked eyes. These restrictions would basically freeze human development while other species continued to grow. Additionally, Vex then continued, human diplomatic activities will be monitored to prevent further disruption of established alliance structures. All new trade agreements involving human parties must receive council review before implementation. The Altarian delegate stood up next. His name was Minister Corvash, and he represented one of the oldest species in the council. His deep voice rumbled through the chamber. The Altarian Republic supports this proposal, he declared. Human expansion has already disrupted 3 major trade routes that our merchants have used for generations. Their military buildup threatens the security of established colonies. Action must be taken to restore balance. One by one, other species began voicing their support. The Centauran Empire worried about human ships in their space. The Draconian hegemony complained about human research affecting their technological advantages. Even smaller species that Jake thought were friendly to Earth expressed concerns about human influence growing too fast. Jake listened to each speech with growing disbelief. These were the same species that had welcomed humanity into the Council 5 years ago. They had praised human contributions to science, trade, and security. They had signed mutual defense treaties and research partnerships. Now they were talking about humanity like a disease that needed to be contained. Lisa touched his arm gently. Jake, she whispered, they've been planning this for months. Look at how coordinated their arguments are. This isn't a spontaneous concern. This is a conspiracy. Ryan leaned forward from behind them. Sir, we need to respond to this. We can't let them pass these restrictions without a fight. But Jake was thinking deeper than just this moment. He was remembering conversations with President Karen Walsh back on Earth. She had warned him that human success might create jealousy and fear among older species. She had given him instructions for exactly this kind of situation. The human delegation, Jake said quietly to his team, will not be fighting today. Both Lisa and Ryan looked at him with surprise. They expected him to stand up and give a speech, defending humanity's rights. They expected him to argue about fairness and cooperation. They expected him to make threats about what would happen if these restrictions were imposed. Instead, Jake Morrison sat back in his chair and watched as more species voiced their support for limiting human development. He memorized every face, every vote, every argument used against his people. He noted which species seemed uncomfortable with the proposal, And which ones pushed hardest for the restrictions? When the formal presentations ended, Vexton looked directly at the human table. Ambassador Morrison, the Council recognizes Earth's right to respond to this proposal. What is humanity's position? Jake stood slowly and looked around the chamber. 46 species were staring at him, waiting for his reaction. Some looked nervous, others confident, a few seemed almost apologetic. But they were all waiting to see how humanity would handle being cornered by the entire galaxy. The human delegation, Jake said in a calm, clear voice, requests a 48-hour recess to fully consider this proposal and consult with our government. That was it. No angry speech about rights and freedom. No threats about leaving the council. Number. Desperate attempts to negotiate or compromise. Just a simple, professional request for time. Vexton looked surprised. Of course, Ambassador. The council grants your request. We will reconvene in 48 hours for your response and the final vote. Jake nodded politely, gathered his materials with careful precision, and walked toward the chamber exit. Lisa and Ryan followed, both looking confused by his calm reaction. The silence started immediately after they left the council chamber. Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime Station with his usual calm pace, but something had changed. Lisa Grant and Ryan Bell could feel it. Other aliens they passed in the hallways kept staring at them, waiting for some kind of reaction. Jake, Lisa whispered as they entered the human residential section. What are we doing? Shouldn't we be calling Earth? Making emergency plans? Building alliances? With the species that might support us? Jake stopped at the entrance to his quarters and turned to face his team. His expression was completely calm, almost peaceful. We are going to do exactly what I told the council we would do. We are going to consider their proposal. Ryan shook his head in confusion. Sir, with respect, there's nothing to consider. They want to put chains on humanity. They want to stop our growth, limit our ships, control our research. We need to fight this, do we? Jake asked quietly. Ryan, you're a military man. What's the first rule of warfare? Know your enemy, Ryan replied automatically. Exactly. And right now we don't know our enemy. We don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. We don't know which species can be trusted and which ones are working against us. We don't know what tools they have or what they're really afraid of. Jake opened his door and gestured for them to follow him inside. So we're going to find out. Lisa understood first. She always did. You want us to gather intelligence while they think we're panicking. Not panicking, Jake corrected. They expect us to panic. They expect desperate meetings, frantic communications, last-minute deal-making. When we don't do what they expect, they'll get nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Over the next 2 days, Jake's team began what looked like normal activities, but was actually the most important intelligence-gathering operation in human history. They split up and moved through the station like they had nothing more important to do than pass time while waiting for the vote. Dr. Lisa Grant spent her time in the station's central archives. She told the librarian, a helpful Andromedan named Zix, that she was working on a research project about galactic economic patterns. This was technically true, but not in the way Zix understood. Lisa's real goal was to map every trade route, every resource flow, every economic connection between the 47 species of the Council. She downloaded massive databases of shipping records, manufacturing statistics, and resource distribution data. The information was all publicly available, but no one had ever tried to see the complete picture before. What she found was shocking. Humanity had become far more important to the galactic economy than anyone realized, including the humans themselves. In just 5 years, human ships carried 30% of all interspecies cargo. Human factories produced essential components for everything from Zephyrian computers to Altarian mining equipment. Human researchers had contributed to breakthrough discoveries that 16 different species now depended on. We're not just growing fast, Lisa muttered to herself as she studied the data. We've become the backbone of half the galaxy's infrastructure. She downloaded everything she could find, storing it on encrypted drives that looked like normal research materials. When other species representatives tried to start conversations about the upcoming vote, she just smiled and talked about her academic work. Let them think she was just a scientist who didn't understand politics. Meanwhile, Commander Ryan Bell was conducting his own type of research. He took long walks through the station's public areas, his trained eye cataloging everything that might be militarily important. Security checkpoints, guard rotations, communication hubs, power distribution centers, emergency protocols. Ryan had fought in 3 different wars before joining the diplomatic corps. He knew how to read a potential battlefield and Nexus Prime. Station was definitely a potential battlefield. If things went wrong, if the vote led to some kind of conflict, he wanted to know exactly what the humans would be facing. The station's security was mostly Zephyrian, with some Centaurian officers in the command positions. Ryan counted guards, noted their weapons, observed their patrol patterns. He struck up casual conversations with off-duty security personnel, buying them drinks and listening to their complaints about their jobs. "You humans sure know how to relax," laughed a young Zephyrian guard named Kethmer after Ryan bought him a drink at one of the station's bars. "Most species get all tense when there's a big vote coming up. You're just here enjoying yourself." Ryan smiled and raised his glass. "Life's too short to worry about politics. Besides, whatever happens, happens. We'll deal with it." But Ryan was learning valuable information from these conversations. The security forces were nervous about the vote too. They'd been given extra duty assignments and told to watch for potential unrest. Some of the older officers were worried about what would happen if the humans got angry and caused trouble. The interesting part was that none of them seemed to think the humans would actually fight. They were preparing for riots or protests, not military action. They had no idea that humanity's real strength lay in areas they couldn't see or guard against. Jake Morrison himself was the most visible member of the team, and also the most mysterious. He maintained his normal schedule. Exactly. He ate breakfast in the diplomatic dining hall, attended cultural events, used the recreational facilities, and took evening walks through the observation decks, but he spoke to no one about the proposal. When other ambassadors approached him with offers to talk, attempts to negotiate, or even expressions of sympathy, Jake deflected every conversation. He asked about their families, their homeworld's weather, their favorite foods. He was perfectly friendly and completely unhelpful. Ambassador Tethra of the Andromedan Collective cornered him after dinner on the first night. The Andromedans had abstained from the initial discussions, and Tethra seemed genuinely concerned about the situation. "Jake, my friend," the ambassador said, his translator making his insect-like clicking sounds into smooth English. "Surely there is some way to resolve this matter peacefully. The Andromedan Collective values our relationship with humanity. Perhaps we could discuss modifications to the proposal that would be acceptable to all parties." Jake smiled warmly and clasped the alien's shoulder in a friendly gesture. "Tethra, you're very kind to be concerned. Tell me, how are your offspring doing? I remember you mentioning that 3 of them just entered their chrysalis stage." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, but never returned to politics. Tethra left more confused than when he had arrived. Jake had been perfectly pleasant and completely impossible to negotiate with. This pattern repeated over and over. The draconian military attach tried to warn Jake about the consequences of non-compliance. Jake responded by asking about draconian poetry and whether the attach could recommend any good examples. The Centaurian trade minister offered to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements. Jake spent the conversation learning about Centaurian cooking techniques. Behind the scenes, however, Jake was having very different conversations. The quantum entanglement communicators in the human diplomatic suite allowed instant communication with Earth, completely secure from any alien monitoring. Jake spent hours each night in detailed discussions with President Karen Walsh and the Human Colonial Council. "They're more afraid than we thought," Jake reported during one of these sessions. "This isn't just about stopping our expansion. They're scared of becoming irrelevant. They've been the big powers for centuries, and suddenly there's this new species that's changing everything." President Walsh's voice came through the communicator with crystal clarity. "What's your assessment of our position, Jake?" "Stronger than they know," Jake replied. "Lisa's data shows that we've become essential to their economy. Ryan's intelligence suggests their security forces are prepared for the wrong kind of problem. And the way they're approaching this vote tells me they don't understand how we think." "Explain that last part." Jake looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. "They think like politicians, Karen. They're trying to solve this problem by passing laws and making rules. They think they can control us by limiting our official activities. They don't understand that our real strength isn't in our government or our military. It's in our people." "You mean the traders, researchers, teachers, and technical specialists working throughout the galaxy?" "Exactly. There are over 2 million humans living and working in non-human space right now. They maintain critical systems, conduct essential research, provide irreplaceable services. The Council thinks they can restrict humanity by putting limits on Earth's government. They have no idea that humanity is already woven into the fabric of their civilization." The conversations with Earth continued each night, but during the day, Jake maintained his appearance of calm unconcern. He never seemed worried, never appeared to be planning anything, never gave any indication that humanity was preparing a response. Other species representatives found this behavior increasingly unsettling. They had expected anger, protests, desperate negotiations. Instead, they got polite small talk and pleasant smiles. Some began to wonder if they had misjudged the situation. On the second day, Prime Speaker Vex then himself approached Jake during lunch. The council chamber was packed when Jake Morrison walked in for the final session. Every seat was filled, the gallery was crowded with observers, and news reporters from dozens of species pointed their recording devices at the human delegation table. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake took his seat between Lisa Grant and Ryan Bell, his movements as calm and measured as they had been 2 days ago. He placed his data pad on the table, adjusted his chair slightly, and looked around the chamber with the same polite interest he might show at a cultural exhibition. Lisa noticed that several ambassadors were staring at their table with obvious anxiety. The Zephyrian delegation kept whispering among themselves and glancing over at the humans. Even the usually composed Centaurian Empire representatives looked nervous. Only the humans seemed completely relaxed. Prime Speaker Vex then called the session to order, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "Fellow beings of the Galactic Council, we reconvene to hear humanity's response to the Developmental Restriction Protocol, and to cast our final votes on this matter." Jake stood when called upon, his movements unhurried and professional. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from each species. Some met his gaze directly, others looked away uncomfortably. A few seemed to be holding their breath. "Honored representatives," Jake began, his voice steady and clear. "The Human Colonial Council has carefully considered the proposal presented to this body. We have consulted with our government, reviewed the terms thoroughly, and reached our decision." The chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of translation devices. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting for humanity's response. Would they fight? Would they negotiate? Would they threaten to leave the Council? "The Human Colonial Council accepts the will of the Galactic Council," Jake announced. We will comply with whatever decision this body makes regarding our membership and activities. A collective sigh seemed to go through the chamber, but it was not relief, it was confusion. The other representatives had expected arguments, counter-proposals, desperate pleas. Instead, they got simple acceptance. Something about Jake's calm agreement made everyone more nervous, not less. Vexton looked surprised by the response. Ambassador Morrison, do you wish to address the specific terms of the protocol before the vote? No, Prime Speaker, Jake replied. The Human Colonial Council trusts the wisdom of the Galactic Council. We are prepared to abide by whatever restrictions this body deems necessary. Now the confusion in the chamber was obvious. Representatives were looking at each other with worried expressions. This was not how they had expected the session to go. Humanity's quiet acceptance felt more threatening than angry protests would have been. Very well, Vexton said, though he sounded uncertain. The Council will now vote on the Developmental Restriction Protocol. Each species will cast their vote in order of seniority. The voting began with the oldest member species, the Altarian. Republic cast the first vote, their Minister Corvash standing to announce their decision. But even as he spoke the word, yes, his voice lacked the confidence it had held 2 days earlier. The Altarian Republic votes to approve the protocol, Corvash said, then sat down quickly without the long speech he had given before. One by one, the species cast their votes. The Centaurian Empire voted yes, but their military attach looked uncomfortable as he spoke. The Draconian Hegemony voted yes, but their representative avoided looking at the human table. The Zephyrian Collective vote was a firm yes, but even Prime Speaker Vexton seemed less certain than before. Jake watched each vote with the same calm attention he had shown throughout the crisis. He made no notes, showed no emotion, gave no indication of what he was thinking. Lisa and Ryan sat equally still beside him, their faces professionally neutral. As the voting continued, a pattern emerged. Every species that had spoken strongly in favor of the protocol 2 days ago still voted yes, but their enthusiasm had disappeared. They cast their votes like people who were no longer sure they were making the right choice. The few species that had opposed the protocol voted no again. The Andromedan Collective and 2 smaller species abstained, just as they had indicated they would. But even the opposition votes seemed half-hearted, as if the speakers were going through the motions rather than fighting for their beliefs. When the final vote was counted, the result was exactly what everyone had expected. 38 species voted to approve the Developmental Restriction Protocol. 5 voted against it. 4 abstained. The motion passed by a wide margin. Vexton announced the results with less ceremony than usual. The Developmental Restriction Protocol is hereby approved and will take effect immediately. Ambassador Morrison, does humanity have any final statement before this session concludes? Jake stood again, his movements still calm and unhurried. He looked around the chamber one more time, his gaze lingering on each delegation. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly to every corner of the room. The Human Colonial Council acknowledges the result of this vote, he said. We will comply fully with all terms of the protocol and with all existing agreements between humanity and the Galactic Council. He paused, and in that pause, something changed in the chamber. The representatives who had been nervous before now looked worried. Something about the way Jake spoke made his simple words sound like a warning. Effective immediately, Jake continued. All human activities will be restricted to those specifically permitted by our current membership agreements and the terms of this new protocol. We will limit our actions to exactly what the Council has authorized. Another pause. Lisa could see confusion spreading across alien faces throughout the chamber. They had expected compliance, but this sounded like something more specific and more troubling. The Human Colonial Council wishes to thank all species who have supported us during our membership in this body, Jake said. We have learned much about galactic civilization and about the true nature of interspecies cooperation. We will remember these lessons as we move forward. With that, Jake gathered his materials from the table. Lisa and Ryan did the same, their movements synchronized and professional. They showed no signs of anger, no indication of protest, no hint of the dramatic exit that many had expected. As they reached the chamber's exit, Prime Speaker Vex then called out, "Ambassador Morrison, the Council wishes to maintain positive relations with humanity despite these necessary restrictions. We hope Earth understands that this action was taken for the benefit of all species." Jake stopped at the threshold and turned back to face the assembly. His expression was perfectly polite, but something in his eyes made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Prime Speaker," Jake said, his voice carrying that same quiet tone that had made everyone nervous. "The Human Colonial Council completely understands the Council's position. You have made it very clear how you view humanity's role in galactic affairs. We will act accordingly." He nodded once to the chamber, then turned and walked out. Lisa and Ryan followed, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The great doors closed behind them with a soft thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The chamber remained quiet for several seconds after the humans left. Then conversations began breaking out all around the room. Representatives clustered together, talking in worried whispers about what had just happened. "Did that sound like compliance to you?" Minister Corvesh asked his aide, doubt clear in his voice. "I'm not sure what that sounded like," the aide replied. "But it didn't sound good." Similar conversations were happening throughout the chamber. The vote had gone exactly as planned, but nobody felt like they had won anything. Jake Morrison's calm acceptance felt more ominous than angry threats would have been. Within an hour, the human delegation had checked out of their quarters and boarded their diplomatic ship. They filed proper departure forms, followed standard protocols, and said polite goodbyes to station personnel. Everything was done correctly and professionally. Captain Helen Parks, the ship's commander, met them at the airlock. "How did it go?" "Sir, exactly as expected, Captain," Jake replied. "Please set course for Earth. Standard speed, no rush. Any messages to send ahead, sir?" Jake smiled, and for the first time in 3 days, his smile looked genuine. "Yes, Captain. Send a message to President Walsh. Tell her the Council has made their choice. Tell her it's time to show them what that choice really means." As the human diplomatic vessel pulled away from Nexus Prime Station, the first signs of what was to come were already beginning to manifest. In the shipping lanes between Altair and Centauri, human cargo vessels were suddenly changing course. On research stations throughout the galaxy, human scientists were quietly updating their project statuses. In the offices of the Galactic Trade Commission, human bureaucrats were reviewing which activities fell under their new restrictions. The Council had voted to limit humanity's expansion and influence. They thought they had solved their problem with a simple vote. They had no idea that they had just triggered the most significant shift in galactic politics in 300 years. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching Nexus Prime Station shrink in the distance. The first sign that something was wrong came exactly 12 hours after the human diplomatic ship left Nexus Prime Station. Captain Morthak of the Altarian merchant vessel Deep Current was waiting at the orbital dock above Altair 7 when he received a message that made his fur stand on end. "This is Captain Jenny Lewis of the human cargo ship Bright Star," the communication said. "We regret to inform you that we cannot complete our scheduled delivery to Altair 7. Due to recent Galactic Council decisions regarding human activities, we are restricted from operating in non-human territorial space. Please contact your local authorities for alternative shipping arrangements." Captain Morthak stared at his communication screen in confusion. The bright star was carrying 3,000 tons of atmospheric processors that the mining colony on Altair 7 desperately needed. Without those processors, the miners would start having breathing problems within a week. "Captain Lewis," Morthak replied quickly, "surely there has been some mistake. This is a standard commercial delivery. The Council restrictions were about military expansion and research, not normal trade." The response came back immediately. "Captain Morthak, we have reviewed our instructions from Earth's Colonial Commerce Authority. All human vessels are to restrict their activities to human space only until further notice. We cannot enter Altarian territory under current regulations. Deep current out." The human ship disappeared from his sensors, heading back toward human space with its vital cargo. Captain Morthak immediately contacted the Altarian Trade Ministry, but they had no answers for him. The bureaucrats on Altair Prime were just as confused as he was. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On Centauri 5, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was packing her research equipment into storage containers. She had been working with Centaurian agricultural scientists for 3 years, developing new crop varieties that could grow in harsh soil conditions. The project had been incredibly successful, increasing food production on 12 different worlds, but Dr. Rodriguez had received new orders from Earth's Research Council that morning. All human scientists working on joint projects with alien species were to suspend their activities immediately. The Council's restrictions on human research meant that Earth could no longer participate in collaborative programs that might affect galactic technological balance. But Dr. Rodriguez pleaded her Centaurian colleague, Dr. Thexmel, "We are so close to a breakthrough on the grain resistance project. The new seeds could feed millions of people across our empire." Elena felt terrible as she sealed the last container. "I'm sorry, Thexmal. I really am. But my government says that continued participation in this project would violate the Council's new restrictions on human research activities. I have to follow orders." Dr. Thexmel watched helplessly as 3 years of collaborative work was packed away and prepared for shipment back to human space. The Centaurian government had spent enormous resources on this project, and now it was dead in the water without human expertise, on the Zephyrian Defense Station orbiting their homeworld. Commander Vexter was dealing with an even more immediate crisis. 20% of their early warning sensor network had gone dark during the night shift. These sensors were human-manufactured devices that required specialized maintenance protocols and replacement parts. When Commander Vexter contacted the Human Technical Support Office that normally handled such problems, he received an automated message that chilled his blood. "Thank you for contacting Morrison Technical Solutions," the message said. "Due to recent Galactic Council restrictions on human military involvement, we can no longer provide technical support for installations in non-human space. Please contact your local defense contractors for alternative maintenance services. We appreciate your past business." Commander Vexter knew that there were no local contractors who understood human sensor technology. The Zephyrians had become dependent on human technical expertise because it was simply better than anything else available. Now that expertise was gone, and their entire defense grid was slowly failing, the pattern repeated across known space. Human teachers at the prestigious Andromedan Science Academy submitted resignation letters, explaining that Earth's Education Ministry could no longer authorize their participation in alien educational programs. Human medical teams serving on multi-species hospital stations requested immediate transfers back to human facilities. Human tour guides on luxury resort worlds politely informed their alien employers that they could no longer work outside human space. Human technical specialists maintaining everything from communications networks to power plants began shutting down their operations and booking passage home. Each action was perfectly legal and professionally executed. Every human who left their position provided proper notice, completed their current responsibilities, and handed over their duties to local replacements where possible. But in most cases, there were no local replacements who could do the job. Dr. Sarah Kim, head of the Human Galactic Medical Exchange Program, spent her day sending carefully worded messages to dozens of alien hospitals and research facilities. Each message was essentially the same. Due to recent Galactic Council decisions regarding human activities, the Medical Exchange Program can no longer authorize human medical personnel to serve in non-human facilities. All current assignments will be terminated within 30 days. To allow for proper transition of patient care. We wish you success in your future medical endeavors. The responses came back within hours, and they were all desperate. The Draconian Military Hospital had 30 human doctors who were the only specialists qualified to treat certain combat injuries. The Centaurian Children's Medical Center had human pediatric surgeons who had been saving lives that local doctors couldn't help. The Altarian Geriatric Institute had human researchers working on age-related diseases that affected multiple species. All of these programs were ending because of the Council's restrictions. Earth's interpretation of the new rules was simple. If the Council wanted to limit human activities, then humans would limit their activities completely. Minister Corvash of the Altarian Republic was the first government official to understand the scope of what was happening. He spent the morning reviewing reports from across Altarian space, and each report was worse than the last. The mining operation on Altair 7 was shutting down due to life support failures. 3 agricultural worlds were facing potential crop failures without human technical assistance. The Altarian Space Defense Force was operating with reduced sensor coverage due to human equipment malfunctions. Even the tourist industry was suffering as human-operated entertainment facilities closed their doors. "Get me a direct communication line to Earth," Minister Corvash ordered his aide. "I need to speak with someone in authority immediately." The aide tried for 2 hours but could not get through to anyone in the human colonial government. Every office he contacted gave him the same polite response. All communications regarding the Galactic Council situation should be directed through proper diplomatic channels. Those channels led back to Nexus Prime Station, where Ambassador Jake Morrison was no longer available. Prime Speaker Vexton was having similar problems. The Zephian government was experiencing cascading failures across multiple systems, and every attempt to contact human technical support met with the same automated responses about council restrictions. By the end of the first day, emergency sessions were being called in government buildings across the galaxy. The economic and technical disruption was far worse than anyone had predicted. Species that had thought they were self-sufficient discovered that human involvement had become essential to their daily operations. Captain Beth Turner, commander of the human research vessel Star Explorer, was one of the last humans to leave non-human space. She had been working with a joint scientific expedition studying gravitational anomalies near the galactic core. The research was groundbreaking and could lead to new forms of faster-than-light travel, but her orders from Earth were clear. All human research vessels were to return to human space immediately. Captain Turner felt sick as she watched alien scientists pleading with her to stay, explaining how much her ship's equipment and crew expertise meant to the project. "I'm sorry," she told Dr. Kelvax, the Andromedan project leader. "I really am, but my government says that continued participation would violate the Council's restrictions on human research expansion. We have to go." Dr. Kelvax watched the human ship disappear into hyperspace, taking with it the most advanced sensor array in the expedition and 3 of the team's best scientists. The project would probably collapse without human involvement, just like dozens of other collaborative efforts across the galaxy. On Nexus Prime Station, the remaining Council representatives were receiving increasingly frantic reports from their home governments. The humans had been gone for less than 2 days, But the effects of their withdrawal were already catastrophic. Ambassador Tethra of the Andromedan Collective found Prime Speaker Vexthan in his office, staring at a stack of emergency communications from the Zephyrian homeworld. "Vexthan," Tethra said urgently, "we need to contact the humans immediately. This situation is spiraling out of control." 2 weeks after the vote, Prime Speaker Vexthan stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council that looked nothing like the confident assembly that had restricted humanity. The chamber was filled with desperate representatives whose governments were collapsing under the weight of human withdrawal. Minister Corvash of the Altarian Republic looked like he had not slept in days. Dark circles ringed his eyes as he clutched a datapad filled with disaster reports. 3 Altarian colony worlds were on the verge of evacuation due to life support failures. Their mining operations had ground to a halt without human atmospheric processors. Food shortages were spreading as agricultural systems dependent on human technology began failing. The Centaurian military attach was equally haggard. General Thraksen's normally perfect uniform was wrinkled, and his proud crest feathers were drooping with exhaustion. The Centaurian Empire's communication network had suffered massive failures when human-maintained relay stations went offline. Worse, their food production was dropping rapidly as crops developed without human agricultural assistance began dying in the fields. "This cannot continue," Vexthan announced to the assembly, though his own voice lacked its usual authority. The Zephyrian homeworld's defense grid was operating at 40% capacity, leaving them vulnerable to the very raiders and pirates that the Council's military cooperation had been designed to stop. "We must contact Earth immediately and resolve this crisis." But every attempt to reach the human colonial government had failed. President Karen Walsh was not accepting direct communications from Council members. The human embassy on Nexus Prime Station sat empty, its doors sealed and its staff gone. Even the quantum communication arrays that normally carried urgent diplomatic messages to Earth were responding with the same automated message: "Please direct all inquiries through proper diplomatic channels." Ambassador Tara Wilson walked into the chamber at that moment, and the entire assembly fell silent. She was younger than Jake Morrison, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple style and brown eyes that revealed nothing of her thoughts. She moved with the same calm confidence that had made Morrison so unsettling during the restriction vote. Wilson took her seat at the human delegation table without acknowledging the stares from around the chamber. She arranged her materials with precise movements, activated her translation device, and folded her hands on the table. Then she waited. Prime Speaker Vexthan was the first to break the silence. "Ambassador Wilson, the Council is grateful that Earth has sent a representative to address this crisis." "There is no crisis from humanity's perspective," Wilson replied in a clear, professional tone. "The Human Colonial Council is in full compliance with all Galactic Council restrictions. We have limited our activities to exactly what your vote authorized." Minister Corvash stood up so quickly that his chair nearly fell over. "Ambassador, with respect, this cannot be what the Council intended. The restrictions were meant to slow human expansion, not destroy interspecies cooperation." Wilson looked at him with the same polite attention she might give to someone discussing the weather. "Minister Corvash, the Galactic Council voted to restrict human territorial expansion, human fleet growth, human research activities, and human diplomatic influence. The Human Colonial Council has restricted all of these things. We are operating within the exact parameters this body established. But the economic disruption, the technical failures, the research programs that have been abandoned, General." Thraksen interrupted desperately. "Surely these consequences were not intended." "The Human Colonial Council is not responsible for the consequences of the Galactic Council's decisions," Wilson replied. "We are simply following the restrictions you voted to impose." The chamber erupted in frustrated voices as representatives tried to speak at once. Some demanded that humans return to their previous activities immediately. Others offered new trade agreements and research partnerships. A few even suggested that the original vote had been a mistake and should be reversed. Through it all, Ambassador Wilson sat quietly and waited for order to be restored. When Prime Speaker Vex then finally managed to quiet the assembly, she stood to address them directly. The Human Colonial Council recognizes that some species are experiencing difficulties adjusting to our compliance with your restrictions, Wilson said. We are prepared to discuss modifications to our current agreements, but such discussions must be based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. The recent vote demonstrated that many species view humanity as a problem to be controlled rather than a partner to be valued. Until that perspective changes, our withdrawal from non-essential galactic activities will continue. Minister Corvash raised his hand to speak. Ambassador Wilson, what would it take for humanity to resume its previous level of involvement in galactic affairs? Wilson consulted her datapad, though everyone suspected she already knew the answer. The Human Colonial Council would require the complete repeal of the Developmental Restriction Protocol and its replacement with agreements that recognize humanity as an equal partner in galactic civilization. What specific terms would humanity consider acceptable? Vex then asked, though he looked like he was afraid to hear the answer. Full territorial rights equal to those enjoyed by senior council species, Wilson replied without hesitation. Unrestricted research cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than council oversight. Military cooperation agreements that recognize human capabilities rather than limiting them. And voting rights in the council that reflect humanity's actual contribution to galactic civilization. The chamber fell silent as representatives realized what Wilson was proposing. These were not the terms of a restricted junior member species. These were the demands of a major galactic power that expected to be treated as such. General Thrakson was the first to object. Those terms would make humanity one of the most powerful species in the council. We cannot simply grant such concessions because of temporary economic disruptions. Wilson's expression did not change, but something in her eyes made several representatives shift uncomfortably. General, there is nothing temporary about humanity's compliance with your restrictions. We will continue to limit our activities until the Council demonstrates that it values our partnership. Over the next 3 hours, desperate negotiations took place around the chamber. Species representatives huddled in small groups, calculating the cost of continued human withdrawal. Against the political difficulty of granting humanity senior status in the Council, the math was terrifying. The Altarian Republic faced potential colony evacuations within a month. The Centaurian Empire's food crisis was worsening daily. The Zephyrian defense grid failures had already resulted in 3 successful pirate raids on outer settlements. Dozens of smaller species were reporting critical infrastructure failures as human technical support remained unavailable. Ambassador Wilson waited patiently through all of these discussions. When representatives approached her with partial offers or compromise proposals, she listened politely and promised to relay them to Earth, but she made no commitments and offered no immediate relief. Dr. Kelvax of the Andromedan Collective finally asked the question that everyone was thinking. Ambassador Wilson, how long is humanity prepared to maintain this withdrawal? Dr. Kelvax, Wilson replied. Humanity spent 5 years building partnerships and contributing to galactic civilization. We invested enormous resources in research, trade, and cooperation that benefited every species in this council. 2 weeks ago, you voted to treat us as a threat to be contained rather than a partner to be valued. She stood and looked around the chamber, her gaze taking in the desperate faces and worried expressions. The Human Colonial Council is prepared to wait as long as necessary for this body to decide whether it wants humanity as a genuine partner or not at all. The vote, when it finally came, was swift and unanimous. The developmental restriction protocol was repealed by a margin of 46-0 with one abstention. In its place, the Council passed the Interspecies Cooperation Accords, which granted humanity full senior partner status with expanded rights, unrestricted research cooperation, and significant voting power. Ambassador Wilson accepted the new agreement with the same professional calm she had maintained throughout the crisis. As she signed the documents, she made one final observation that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The Human Colonial Council appreciates the Council's recognition of our contributions to galactic civilization. We have learned valuable lessons about the nature of true partnership during this process. We look forward to renewed cooperation, based on mutual respect and shared benefit. Within days, human ships began returning to the trade routes. Human researchers rejoined collaborative projects with new agreements that recognized their expertise. Human technical specialists resumed their work maintaining critical infrastructure across the galaxy. But everything was different now that the balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. Never again would any species vote to restrict humanity without carefully considering the consequences. The galaxy had learned that Earth's children possess something more dangerous than advanced weapons or superior technology.